The year was 2387, and humanity had spent nearly a century as junior members of the Galactic Council. The Council was made up of 12 alien species who controlled most of the known galaxy. They made the laws. They decided who could trade with whom. They determined which planets could be colonized and which were off-limits. Earth had joined the Council 93 years ago, back when humans first developed faster than light travel. The alien races had welcomed humanity with open arms and warm words. They called humans their friends. They called them partners. They gave Earth a seat at the great table where galactic decisions were made. But that seat came with a price. For nearly a century, humanity had given everything to the Council. Human soldiers fought and died in wars that had nothing to do with Earth. Human scientists shared their discoveries freely, while other races kept their secrets hidden. Human ships patrolled dangerous space lanes so that alien merchants could travel safely. Admiral Daniel Hayes had served the Council for 40 years. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much death. He had led human forces in defense of 3 different Council homeworlds during the Kethrani invasion. He had watched thousands of his people die protecting aliens, who barely acknowledged their sacrifice. Now he was 3,000 light years from home, fighting another war that was not his own. The Vexorian swarm had emerged from the dark space between galaxies 6 months ago. They were a hive species that consumed everything in their path. The Council had called upon humanity once again, and Earth had answered. 70% of the human fleet had been sent to the front lines, leaving the home system defended by only a small force. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the battle unfold on the tactical display. His fleet was winning, pushing the swarm back toward the nebula where they had first appeared. It should have been a moment of pride, instead, Hayes felt a cold weight in his stomach. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. 3,000 light years away, Ambassador Linda Morrison sat in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council. She was a small woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. She had served as Earth's voice on the Council for 15 years. She knew how to read the alien faces around her, how to spot lies behind their strange expressions. Today, something was different. The 12 Council representatives watched her with a strange intensity. Chancellor Zorath of the Velthari Dominion sat at the head of the table, his blue skin shimmering under the artificial lights. He was smiling, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Linda's communication device buzzed. She looked down and felt her blood turn to Eistad. The message was from Earth Command. Council warships had entered the Sol system. 500 capital ships, accompanied by thousands of smaller vessels. They were not responding to hails. They were taking up attack positions around Earth. Linda looked up at the alien faces surrounding her. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. Chancellor Zorath spoke first. His voice was calm and pleasant, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the fate of an entire species. He explained that the Council had reached a decision. Humanity had grown too quickly. Human technology was advancing faster than any species in recorded history. Human population was expanding beyond acceptable limits. In another century, humans would surpass the Council races in every measurable way. This could not be allowed. The Council had voted unanimously. Earth would be neutralized. Human colonies would be absorbed into Council territory. The human population would be reduced to manageable numbers and placed under permanent supervision. Humanity would continue to exist, but only as servants. Linda listened in silence as her world collapsed around her. On her device, she watched the feed from Earth. Council battleships were already firing on the orbital defense platforms. The planetary shield was failing. Cities were burning. She thought of her daughter, who lived in New Chicago. She thought of her grandchildren, who had never known anything but peace. She thought of all the young men and women who had died fighting the Council's wars. Believing they were protecting their friends and allies, the Council representatives were still talking, explaining the terms of humanity's surrender. They spoke of quotas and restrictions, of breeding programs and thought monitoring. They spoke of humanity's future as if humans were livestock to be managed. Linda stood up slowly. The aliens fell silent, watching her with curious eyes. She told them that they had made a terrible mistake. Chancellor Zorath laughed. He asked what mistake that could possibly be. Earth was defeated. The human fleets were scattered across the galaxy, too far away to help. By the time they learned what had happened, it would be over. Linda shook her head. She said that the Council had spent a century watching humanity, but had never truly understood them. They had seen human kindness and mistaken it for weakness. They had seen human patience and mistaken it for submission. They had seen humans die for alien causes and assumed that humans would accept any fate given to them. She told them that they were wrong. Across the galaxy, human ships were receiving the emergency broadcast. They were learning that their home was under attack, that everything they loved was being destroyed by the very beings they had sworn to protect. Linda looked at Chancellor Zorath and spoke slowly so that every word would be understood. She said that humans did not surrender. Humans did not submit. Humans did not forget. The Council had just created an enemy that would never stop, never forgive, and never show the mercy that humanity had shown for 100 years. She said that the fleets would come. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they would come. And when they did, the Council would learn why humans had conquered their own world before they ever reached the stars. Chancellor Zorath stopped smiling. Linda was seized by Council guards and dragged from the chamber. She did not struggle. She did not scream. She simply looked back at the 12 representatives and smiled. It was a smile that promised something terrible. On Earth, the last defense platform fell silent. Council troops began landing in the burning cities. Millions of humans looked up at the alien ships, darkening their sky, and felt something they had not felt in generations. They felt rage. And far away, scattered across 1,000 stars, human captains and admirals received the same message. They looked at their crews. They looked at their ships. And they made the same decision independently, without hesitation. They would go home, and they would make the Council pay. Captain Ryan Mitchell was 32 years old when the message reached his ship. He was commanding the destroyer Relentless, a fast attack vessel assigned to escort supply convoys through Kethrani space. It was boring work, but important work. The Kethrani were former enemies who had become allies after humanity helped defeat their invasion. They still resented humans, but they kept their hatred quiet. The emergency broadcast arrived at 0347 hours, ship time. Mitchell was asleep in his quarters when his first officer, Lieutenant Katie Barnes, woke him. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. She handed him the datapad without speaking. Mitchell read the message 3 times. Earth was under attack. The Galactic Council had betrayed them. All human vessels were ordered to abandon their current missions and proceed to emergency. Coordinates in the Cygnus Reach. He looked up at Barnes. She was young, barely 25, with red hair and green eyes that usually sparkled with humor. Now those eyes were filled with something Mitchell had never seen before. Fear, yes, but also something darker. Something that burned. Mitchell got dressed and walked to the bridge. His crew was already at their stations. They had all seen the message. Nobody spoke as he took his command chair. He looked at the faces around him. Some were crying quietly. Others sat rigid, their jaws clenched tight. All of them were waiting for him to speak. Mitchell told them that they had a choice. They could follow the emergency protocol and head for the rendezvous point, Or they could stay here, finish their mission, and hope that the council would show them mercy. He asked them what they wanted to do. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every officer, every crew member, every single person on the Relentless wanted the same thing. They wanted to go home. The Relentless turned away from its convoy escort duty and jumped into faster-than-light travel. Behind them, the Kethrani merchants they had been protecting were left vulnerable. Mitchell felt a moment of guilt, but it passed quickly. The Kethrani had been part of the council. They had voted to destroy Earth. They had made their choice. Now humanity would make its choice. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on hundreds of ships. Human vessels abandoned their posts without warning. They left allies undefended. They left enemies unchecked. They simply vanished into the darkness between stars, following encrypted coordinates that no council race could decode. Admiral Daniel Hayes received the news while his fleet was still engaged with the Vexorian swarm near the Tethys Nebula. The battle was almost won. A few more hours and the swarm would be destroyed completely. Hayes ordered his fleet to disengage immediately. His officers protested. They were so close to victory. Abandoning the battle now would allow the swarm to regroup and threaten Council space again. Hayes looked at them with cold eyes. He said that Council space was no longer their concern. Earth was burning. Their families were dying. Nothing else mattered. The human fleet turned and fled, leaving the Vexorian swarm confused and scattered behind them. Council commanders sent furious messages demanding to know what was happening. Hayes did not reply. He simply set course for the Cygnus Reach and pushed his engines to maximum speed. The Cygnus Reach was an empty region of space, far from any inhabited world. There was nothing there except cold rocks and distant stars. It was the perfect hiding place. Human ships began arriving within days. First a handful, then dozens, then hundreds. Destroyers and cruisers came first, their captains eager for news and orders. Then the larger vessels arrived, battleships and carriers that had been stationed at the far edges of explored space. Admiral Hayes took command of the growing fleet. He established a secure communication network and began gathering information. The news from Earth was bad. The Council occupation was complete. Human cities were under martial law. Resistance fighters were being hunted and executed. Millions of people had been killed in the initial attack, but there was also hope that not all humans had been captured. Many had escaped into the wilderness or hidden in underground shelters. Some had managed to steal small ships and flee the planet entirely. They were scattered and scared, but they were alive. Commander Nicole Patterson, Hayes' chief tactical officer, compiled a report on their fleet strength. She was a tall woman with dark skin and a brilliant mind for strategy. She had graduated first in her class at the academy and had served with Hayes for 12 years. Her report was not encouraging. The combined human fleet numbered just over 400 combat-capable vessels. Against the Council's combined military, they were outnumbered nearly 50 to 1. A direct assault on Council space would be suicide. Hayes studied the numbers in silence. Then he began to smile. Patterson asked what he was thinking. Hayes said that the Council expected them to attack. They expected grief and rage and desperate, foolish charges. They were prepared for a short, brutal war that would end with humanity's complete destruction. He said they would not give the Council what it expected. Over the next several weeks, more ships arrived at the Cygnus Reach. Colony ships came, carrying civilians who had escaped the occupied worlds. Research vessels appeared, their scientists already working on new weapons and defensive systems. Mining ships brought raw materials. Factory ships began producing ammunition and replacement parts. The fleet grew larger and stronger every day. Captain Mitchell arrived with the Relentless and was immediately assigned to a strike group. He met with other captains, sharing information and coordinating plans. He learned that human forces had recovered prototype technologies from secret research stations, technologies that Earth's government had kept hidden from the Council for decades. New engines that could outrun anything in the galaxy. New shields that could absorb punishment that would destroy normal ships. New weapons that struck with precision and power beyond anything this Council possessed. Humanity had been preparing for this day, even if they had not known it. Admiral Hayes called a meeting of all senior officers. He stood before them in a converted cargo bay, surrounded by hundreds of men and women who had lost everything and everyone they loved. He told them that they would not seek a quick victory. They would not throw their lives away in pointless attacks. They would be patient and careful and ruthless. They would take their time, gather their strength, and wait for the perfect moment. Then they would take back their home. The officers listened in silence. When Hayes finished speaking, they did not cheer or applaud. They simply nodded and returned to their ships. They had work to do. And somewhere in the darkness of space, the fleet began to move. The Council expected humanity to crumble. They expected tears and despair, and eventually surrender. They had studied human psychology for a century. They believed they understood how humans would react to tragedy. They were wrong. For 6 months, not a single human vessel was detected anywhere in Council space. The fleets had simply vanished, as if swallowed by the void itself. Council scouts searched every known human territory, every colony world, every station and outpost. They found nothing but abandoned buildings and empty ships. It was as if humanity had ceased to exist. Chancellor Zorath assured the other Council members that this was a good sign. The humans were clearly in hiding, broken and afraid. They would emerge eventually, desperate and willing to accept any terms offered to them. The Council simply needed to be patient, but patience was becoming difficult. The trade routes that humans had, protected for decades, were now plagued by pirates. Raiders struck merchant convoys with increasing boldness, knowing that the human patrol ships were gone. Council navies tried to fill the gap, but they were spread too thin. They had never realized how much work humanity had done, how many thankless tasks they had performed. Border regions fell into chaos. The Kethrani, emboldened by humanity's absence, began testing Council defenses again. Smaller species who had been protected by human forces now faced extinction. The galaxy was unraveling, thread by thread. Meanwhile, the human fleet traveled through the darkness. Admiral Hayes led his ships through uncharted space, following routes that human explorers had secretly mapped over decades. These paths were not on any Council database. They wound through dead systems and empty voids, places where no alien had ever ventured. The journey was long and difficult. Ships needed constant repair. Supplies ran low. Crew members grew restless and afraid. Many had family on Earth, family they did not know was alive or dead. The uncertainty was worse than any battle. Chief Engineer Greg Sullivan worked around the clock on the Relentless, installing new systems that had never been tested in combat. He was a large man with rough hands and a gentle voice. He had been building and fixing things since he was a child, and he loved his work more than anything. But now his work had a new purpose. The quantum displacement drives were unlike anything the Council possessed. They folded space differently, allowing ships to travel faster and farther than conventional faster-than-light engines. The technology had been developed in secret labs on Earth's moon, hidden from Council inspectors for 30 years. Sullivan installed the new drive with care and precision. He tested every connection, checked every calculation twice. When he was finished, the Relentless could outrun any ship in the galaxy. Similar upgrades were happening throughout the fleet. New shields that adapted to enemy weapons in real time. New targeting systems that could track 100 targets simultaneously. New missiles that carried payloads designed specifically to destroy Council ship armor. Humanity had been preparing for war without even knowing it. Captain Mitchell spent his free time walking through the civilian ships that traveled with the fleet. These were the refugees, the survivors who had escaped the occupation. They lived in cramped quarters, eating recycled food and breathing recycled air. They had lost their homes, their possessions, everything they had ever known. But they had not lost hope. Mitchell talked to a young girl named Sophie who was traveling with her mother. Sophie was 8 years old with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Her father had died during the initial attack, killed while trying to evacuate civilians from a burning city. Sophie asked Mitchell if they were going to win. She asked it simply, without fear or doubt, as if she already knew the answer but wanted to hear him say it. Mitchell knelt down so he could look her in the eyes. He told her that yes, they were going to win. He promised her that she would see Earth again, that she would play in green fields under a blue sky. He promised that the people who had hurt her family would answer for what they had done. Sophie nodded seriously and went back to her mother. Mitchell returned to his ship and worked twice as hard. The fleet gathered strength as it traveled. Human colonies that had escaped the initial purge sent ships to join them. Mining stations contributed their raw materials. Factory vessels produced weapons and ammunition without rest. Scientists developed new technologies and shared them freely. Admiral Hayes received intelligence reports from agents who had stayed behind in Council space. They sent encrypted messages through hidden channels, reporting on enemy movements and weaknesses. The Council believed humanity was broken and hiding. They had no idea that human eyes were watching their every move. 6 months after the betrayal, Hayes called his senior officers together. They met in a converted cargo bay on his flagship, surrounded by star charts and tactical displays. Hayes pointed to the Sol system on the map. Earth was there, occupied and suffering, waiting for rescue. The Council had stationed 500 ships in the system, enough to crush any conventional attack, but Hayes had no intention of launching a conventional attack. He explained his plans slowly, making sure everyone understood. They would not attack Earth directly. Instead, they would attack everything that supported the Council's occupation. Shipyards, supply depots, communication relays, fuel stations. They would cut the supply lines and blind the enemy commanders. Commander Patterson raised a concern. Even with their new technology, they could not defeat the Council in open battle. The numbers were simply too overwhelming. Hayes smiled. He said they did not need to defeat the Council. Vornia did not need to defeat the Council. They only needed to make the Council defeat itself. The officers listened as Hayes outlined his strategy. It was brilliant and terrifying, a plan that required perfect timing and absolute discipline. It would take months to execute. Many of them would die. But if it worked, humanity would be free. When the briefing ended, the officers returned to their ships. Word spread quickly through the fleet. After 6 months of waiting, they were finally going to fight back. The human fleet turned toward Council space and began the long march home. The first sign of trouble came to Chancellor Zoreth in the middle of the night. A junior officer woke him with news that the Velthari homeworld had lost contact with its orbital defense platforms. Zoreth dismissed it as a technical problem and went back to sleep. He woke again 2 hours later to the sound of alarms. The defense platforms were firing on each other. Automated systems had gone haywire, targeting friendly ships and stations instead of protecting them. By the time technicians managed to shut them down, 3 Council cruisers were destroyed, and the orbital docks were in flames. It was just the beginning. Across Council space, chaos erupted simultaneously. Shipyards that had built the vessels now occupying Earth were attacked by small, fast ships that appeared from nowhere and vanished before defenses could respond. Communication networks went dark as relay stations were destroyed or corrupted. Supply depots exploded, taking millions of tons of fuel and ammunition with them. Human strike teams moved like ghosts to enemy territory. They did not attack civilian targets or cultural centers. They were precise and surgical, hitting only military infrastructure. Each attack was carefully planned to cause maximum damage with minimum casualties. Captain Mitchell led the assault on Valkyrie Prime's orbital stations. The Relentless emerged from quantum displacement directly inside the defense perimeter, appearing so suddenly that enemy sensors could not track it. Weapons were already firing before the Council. Ships realized what was happening. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Mitchell's crew worked with perfect coordination, each person knowing exactly what to do. Lieutenant Barnes handled communications, jamming enemy transmissions and feeding false information into their networks. Chief Sullivan kept the engines running at maximum power, ready to escape at a moment's notice. By the time Council reinforcements arrived, the Relentless was gone. 3 orbital stations were crippled. 2 supply ships were destroyed. A battleship was spinning dead in space, its bridge torn open to the void. Similar strikes hit Council targets across the galaxy. Human ships appeared, attacked, and vanished before anyone could respond. The Council had thousands of ships, but they could not be everywhere at once. The humans could. Lieutenant Commander Amy Chun, the Relentless's chief science officer, had developed something special. She was a small woman with black hair and quiet eyes, but her mind was sharper than any weapon. She had created a computer virus unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The virus did not destroy data. It simply locked it away, encrypting everything with codes that only humans could break. Chun's program spread through Council computer systems like fire through dry grass. Within weeks, military commanders could not access their own tactical databases. Logistics officers could not track their supplies. Intelligence agencies could not read their own reports. The Council was blind. Admiral Hayes waited patiently as his strike teams did their work. He watched the reports come in, tracking enemy responses and adjusting his plans accordingly. The Council was reacting exactly as he had predicted. They were pulling ships from the Sol system to protect their homeworlds. When the time was right, Hayes gave the order. The main human fleet emerged from hiding and began a direct assault on Earth. The Council forces defending the Sol system were caught completely unprepared. They had expected scattered attacks, not a coordinated armada of over 600 warships. They had expected outdated technology, not weapons and shields that outperformed everything in their arsenal. The battle for Earth lasted 9 hours. Human ships fought with a fury that terrified their enemies. They did not retreat. They did not hesitate. When a ship was too damaged to continue fighting, its crew aimed for the nearest enemy vessel and rammed it. When a captain died, the next officer in line took command without missing a beat. Admiral Hayes directed the battle from his flagship, coordinating hundreds of ships with calm precision. He had fought in dozens of battles, but none like this. This was not a war for territory or resources. This was a war for survival. The Council commander tried to negotiate twice. Both times, Hayes refused to respond. When the sun rose over Earth's eastern horizon, the battle was over. Council ships were scattered across the system, most of them burning or drifting powerless. The occupation fleet that had conquered humanity's homeworld was destroyed. Marine forces began landing in the occupied cities. Sergeant Derek Santos led the first team into New Chicago, where resistance fighters had been holding out for months. The streets were filled with rubble, and the buildings were scarred by weapons fire. But the people were still there. They came out of their hiding places to greet the Marines. They cried and laughed and hugged the soldiers who had come to save them. Many of them had not believed this day would ever come. Ambassador Linda Morrison was rescued from a council prison ship by a Marine squad. She had been held captive for 6 months, interrogated and threatened, but she had never broken. She had never given up hope. As she was escorted to safety, Morrison passed a viewing port and stopped. Through the transparent wall, she could see the wreckage of the council fleet. Dozens of ships, hundreds of ships, drifting as lifeless hulks against the backdrop of stars. And beyond them, Earth hung in the darkness. Blue and white and beautiful. Scarred but alive, Morrison began to cry. After 6 months of holding everything inside, she finally allowed herself to feel. The grief and the fear and the anger all came pouring out, mixed with something she had almost forgotten. Joy behind her. Sergeant Santos stood quietly, allowing her this moment. He had lost friends in the battle. He had lost family in the occupation. But standing there, watching the ambassador weep with happiness, he knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. They were home. News of the victory spread across the galaxy within hours. Human forces had reclaimed Earth. The council occupation was over. The impossible had happened. On 100 different worlds, council leaders watched the reports with growing fear. They had underestimated humanity once. They would not make that mistake again, but it was already too late. The council sued for peace 3 weeks after the liberation of Earth. Chancellor Zorath requested a meeting with Admiral Hayes, believing he could still negotiate from a position of strength. The Galactic Council, he reasoned, still controlled most of known space. They still had thousands of warships. Humanity's victory was impressive, but ultimately meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Hayes agreed to meet on a neutral station at the edge of the Velthary system. He arrived with a small escort, just 3 ships, which made Zorath smile. The human was either foolish or desperate. Either way, the Chancellor expected to dictate terms. The meeting room was circular, with a round table in the center. Zorath sat on one side with representatives from all 12 council races. Hayes sat on the other side alone. Zorath began with expressions of regret. He said the council's actions had been unfortunate but necessary. Humanity had grown too powerful too quickly. Surely the Admiral could understand. Surely he could see that some compromise was possible. The council was prepared to offer humanity limited autonomy within certain boundaries. Hayes listened without speaking. His face showed nothing. When Zorath finished, there was a long silence. Then Hayes activated a holographic display. The images that appeared made the council representatives gasp. Human fleets were positioning themselves around every council homeworld simultaneously. Not just the Velthary, but all 12 species. Ships hung in orbit like sharks circling wounded prey, waiting for the order to strike. Hayes showed them more. Locations of every hidden military installation the council possessed. Recordings of secret communications between council leaders. Evidence of the original vote to attack Earth, including which representatives had argued against it and been overruled. The council had kept no secrets from humanity. Humans had been watching and learning for a century. They knew everything. Hayes spoke calmly, as if discussing the weather. He said that humanity had served the council faithfully for 93 years. They had fought the council's wars. They had protected the council's trade routes. They had died for species who secretly despised them. In return, the council had tried to destroy them. Hayes leaned forward, and for the first time, Zora saw something terrifying in those human eyes. Not anger, not hatred. Something colder, something patient. Hayes listed his terms. The council would formally apologize for the unprovoked attack on Earth. A public apology, broadcast to every world in the galaxy. All human prisoners would be released immediately. Every single one, without exception. Reparations would be paid to rebuild Earth's damaged cities and compensate the families of those who had died. Most importantly, the Galactic Council would be dissolved. It would be replaced by a new governing body called the Galactic Assembly, where every species had equal representation, and humanity would hold permanent veto power over any military action. Zorath protested that these terms were impossible. The Council would never accept such humiliation. The other races would never submit to human oversight. Hay smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. He reminded Zorath that humanity had not asked for this war. Humans had been loyal partners who never once threatened the Council. They had shared their technology freely. They had sent their children to die in foreign wars. And when the Council betrayed them, they had shown more restraint than any other species would have. They could have destroyed the Council homeworlds. They could have killed billions of civilians in revenge for the millions of humans who had died. They could have committed the same atrocities that had been inflicted on Earth. Instead, they chose to offer mercy. Hayes suggested that the Chancellor not mistake mercy for weakness. He said that humanity was offering these terms once. If the Council refused, the human fleets would begin their attacks, and they would not stop until every Council species was as broken as Earth had been. Zorath looked at the holographic display. He looked at the images of human ships surrounding his homeworld. He thought of his family down there, vulnerable and afraid. He accepted the terms. The news spread across the galaxy like a wave. The Galactic Council was dissolved. The 12 races that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years had been humbled by a species they had considered inferior. Everything had changed in a single day. Ambassador Linda Morrison was chosen to represent humanity at the first meeting of the new Galactic Assembly. She walked into the great chamber wearing simple clothes, without ceremony or display. The alien representatives watched her with a mixture of fear and respect. Morrison spoke simply and clearly. She said that humanity did not want to rule the galaxy. They did not want revenge or conquest. They wanted only what they had always wanted: peace and fairness and a future for their children. But she made one thing very clear. Humanity would never again allow itself to be betrayed. They would never again trust blindly or serve without question. The galaxy had taught them a hard lesson, and they had learned it well. In the years that followed, the Galactic Assembly brought genuine change to the galaxy. Trade became freer. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation rather than war. Smaller species who had once been ignored now had voices that mattered. Humanity stood at the center of this new order, not as conquerors, but as guardians. Their fleets patrolled the space lanes once again, but now they did it on their own terms. They protected the weak because they chose to, not because they were ordered to. Admiral Hayes retired to the rebuilt city of San Francisco. He spent his remaining years teaching at the academy, training the next generation of officers. He told them stories of the old days, of the betrayal and the long march home. He wanted them to remember. Captain Mitchell was promoted to admiral and given command of the expeditionary fleet. He led missions to uncharted space, expanding humanity's knowledge and reach. He never forgot the promise he had made to a little girl named Sophie. He made sure she got to see Earth's green fields and blue sky, just as he had promised. Lieutenant Commander Chen continued her research, developing technologies that kept humanity ahead of any potential threat. She shared her discoveries with the Assembly, but she always kept something in reserve, just in case. Ambassador Morrison served as Speaker of the Assembly for 20 years. She worked tirelessly for peace and cooperation, but she never forgot what the Council had done. She kept a small piece of rubble from her daughter's home in New Chicago on her desk, a reminder of what humanity had survived. Throughout the galaxy, a new saying spread among the younger races. Parents whispered it to their children. Teachers taught it in their schools. It was a warning and a lesson, passed down from generation to generation. Never betray the humans. They remember. They always remember. And on Earth, Life slowly returned to normal. Cities were rebuilt. Families were reunited. Children were born who would never know the horrors of the occupation. They would grow up in a galaxy that respected humanity, a galaxy that feared humanity, a galaxy that would never again make the mistake of underestimating them. The Council had tried to erase humanity from history. Instead, humanity had rewritten history itself.